Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new video. In this video, I bring you emergency worker stories. This topic has been heavily requested for a while now, and I finally found some really good worthy stories. Although most of the stories are short, this video's main purpose is to show what these people go through on a daily basis. They truly are heroes, and I can't fathom what it's like to do their jobs every single day. Please be respectful in the comments section. You may or may not have heard some of these stories elsewhere on another channel. Now, I don't keep tabs on other narration channels and what stories they all cover, but if by any chance that's the case, that's why I always leave timestamps in a pinned comment on every single video I upload. I also almost threw in a Paramedic Let's Not Meet story I found, but just felt it really didn't fit this video and the message I wanted to show. Although if I do come across any more of those, I'll be sure to do that in a separate video. I want to say that my next video after this will be a long one, and since summer's on its way, I thought it'd be a great way to celebrate with a long video of summer-themed horror stories. So stay tuned for that. Also, one last thing. The stories in this video are very intense and gruesome, and if you can't handle that, well, you should click away right now. Also, the little girl in the first story is my actual real-life sister, and I think she did a really great job at the part, so drop some love for her in the comments. I'd love to show her the comments that you guys write. And she was really excited to be a part of my video. Now, I think I've gotten everything out of the way. Now if you're ready, let's begin on the stories. And remember, stay hungry. I have been a volunteer in our EMS service for the past 18 years or so. The first 5 as an ambulance driver, and the past 13 as an emergency medical technician basic, also known as an EMTB. Several EMTs in our unit have been volunteer EMTs for more than 30 years, a very dedicated group. During the past 2 years while I have been engaged on my personal mission of Hurricane Katrina relief down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, I have been on a leave of absence from my volunteer EMS unit. The crew of 3 other EMTs that I have had the privilege of responding to emergency calls with many years are outstanding emergency medical professionals, and I miss running with them during my absence. Being an emergency responder, whether as a policeman, firefighter, or an emergency medical technician, is very stressful. There are lots of tough calls, and like most emergency responders, I have had my fair share of those tough calls over the years. The following is a true story of one incredibly stressful and sad incident that I experienced as an EMT with my ambulance crew many years ago. One that I have never forgotten, and most likely never will. This post is dedicated to the memory of that sweet little girl, and to all of those thousands of fellow emergency medical technicians, firemen, and police out there on the front lines in our country, making a daily difference to so many in need. It was election night, a number of years ago, and lines of people were standing waiting to vote that evening at the local polls. I had gone and voted right away in the morning when the polls first opened before any lines. That early evening I was at home in our little town, fixing something to eat for supper. It was also the night that my regular volunteer ambulance crew of EMTs was scheduled to be on call from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning to respond to medical emergencies in our EMS district. We 4 EMTs on this crew had been together for a number of years on the same crew, and had experienced a lot of calls together. As I was standing at our counter island finishing my supper dish, a few minutes after 6 it happened. My EMT pager went off. Instantly on alert, I listened as the county EMS dispatcher started announcing our EMT crew's page. Attention Rescue 100. In your village at the corner of West Main and Green Streets for a 9-year-old female reportedly hit by a pickup truck. Timeout 1806. Take this on E. Edward. As I listened to the page, my body tightened up, and the words "oh no" escaped from my mouth as I instantly turned towards the door, grabbed my car keys, and bolted out through the garage to my car, listening to the rest of the page on the way. I threw open the car door, jumped inside, swung it shut, belted up, turned the key, stepped on the gas to move forward out of my driveway and onto the street, and started my way towards the EMS building, which was located about 10 blocks southeast of my home. As I started out on that emergency journey to the EMS building, I reminded myself to remain calm, not to speed, and be extra cautious to try to beat down the adrenaline surging through my body in those moments. When a medical emergency page comes across which involves a child or infant, it seems that there is a heightened level of that adrenaline. And that evening, it was there. It seems like all 4 of us EMTs on the primary crew arrived at the ambulance building at about the same time. Quickly parked, ran for the big door, opened it, and got into the main ambulance, flipped the lights on, radioed EMS dispatch that we were en route, and moved out through the door, turned on the siren, and headed towards the highway just in front of the building, which would take us downtown in about 3 to 4 minutes, where the emergency was located. While we were en route, about halfway there, the EMS dispatcher radioed more information about the call, announcing that there were already 2 EMTs already on location, and that apparently the girl had been in fact not hit, but had been run over by the pickup truck. When I heard that information from the dispatcher, a feeling of dread overcame me. When we heard that, we immediately radioed back to dispatch to start the nearest available paramedic unit on the way to our location to help us out, and to put the nearest medical flight helicopter on immediate standby if they were available. The medical helicopter unit was based at one of the nearby hospitals, about 15 miles away by air. And just like that, we arrived on location at the accident scene. Scores of people were lining the streets, many who were actually in line waiting to vote, and others who were around the accident and saw it happen. The first 2 EMTs who were already on the scene had also been waiting in line to vote when the accident happened outside the village hall, and approximately 40 to 50 feet up the street at the first intersection to the west. Our driver radioed that we had arrived on location, and we all jumped out of the ambulance and hurried over to where the young girl laid in the street. We immediately moved the crowd back away from the young girl, and quickly obtained details on what had occurred, and did a detailed quick trauma exam on the patient. One of the fellow EMTs already there advised that both the front and rear pickup truck wheels had run over the girl's body. Upon hearing that news, the feeling of dread and fear I had within me intensified immensely. We immediately radioed EMS dispatch to send the medical helicopter as quickly as possible to our building, where it would land in the next field next door, and we would transport the patient there. These actions literally happened in only moments of time, as we quickly formulated our next moves. One of the EMTs had gotten the cot out of the rig and moved it next to where we were assessing our patient. At that point, we decided to carefully pick up the patient, secure her on the cot, load the cot into the ambulance immediately, and head for our ambulance building where the paramedic unit had requested we would be arriving in a few minutes, and the medical helicopter a short while after that. As we carefully lifted the young girl in unison onto the cot, holding her small body in our hands and arms, I was crying inside, as I suspect my crewmates were also doing. As we left the scene, en route to our EMS building, we did our best to obtain her vital signs and relay that information into the incoming paramedic unit. A few minutes after arriving at our EMS building, the paramedic unit arrived and took over primary care of the patient. Shortly thereafter, we were assisting them in doing CPR. A few minutes later, the medical helicopter landed and the city flight doctor and flight nurse came running over to our ambulance, and then they took over primary care. Several minutes later, the medical helicopter flight doctor advised that CPR should stop. The truck had just done too much damage. Our EMT crew was all standing outside the ambulance next to the doors when the medical helicopter flight doctor advised to stop CPR. As I looked around, I saw that all of us crew members were crying. The 2 paramedics were crying, and the medical helicopter flight crew was also crying. Those moments were some of the most helpless of my life. One of our female crew members walked away from the ambulance to a spot about 75 feet away, sat down on the curb, holding her head in her hands, sobbing. I walked over to her, sat down beside her, and was just there with her. She looked at me and said, "My kids are her age. It could have just as easily been one of my kids." In a sad twist of irony, one of the EMTs who was in line to vote when that accident happened told us shortly thereafter that the girl's father had told him that when he and his daughter started to walk across the street that night, his daughter grabbed his hand in hers and said to her dad,
"Hold on to my hand, Daddy. I don't want to get run over."
Another law enforcement / EMT checking in. There was a family of 4 in the car, mom driving, teenage daughter in front seat, grandma and 5-year-old son in the back. The mom was texting and driving and didn't notice a huge sweeping curve in the road. Went head on with a gravel hauler 18-wheeler without either of them having time to touch the brakes. My partner arrived a minute before me, and the first thing I saw upon arrival was him crying, carrying the lifeless 5-year-old boy away from the car, covered in all kinds of fluids. I approached what remained of the vehicle's passenger side, and there was blood and brain matter all over. The mom was just pieces, completely severed arms still strapped between the steering wheel and dash, hood, and engine. The grandma pinned behind her, broken back and neck, internally decapitated. Only the teenage daughter in the front seat survived. I've responded to a lot of gross and gruesome things, but this was easily the most disturbing. My daughter was the same age as the little boy, and I will never shake the image of his sad, lifeless body and my partner crying while carrying him away. For fuck's sake, don't text and drive. Firefighter here. I once responded to a vehicle vs 18-wheelers accident. When the car pulled out in front of the truck, which was going approximately 70 miles per hour, the car caught on fire afterwards. Dispatch initially called it out as a vehicle fire, and when we arrived it looked like a car had exploded in the middle of the 5-lane highway. We pulled the passenger out upon arrival, and I vividly remember my captain spraying him down with the hose, because he was burning. He likely died upon impact, but everything except his right arm, which had been out the window, was severely burned. My engineer who pulled him out, he felt the skin give way all the way to the bone. That's how badly the passenger was burned. After the accident and the fire, all that remained of the driver was a pile of human parts melted into what remained of the seat and driver floorboard. It was unrecognizable until the coroner started trying to pull it out and I saw some ribs. Part of the driver's face had been cut off upon impact and was laying in the roadway among the assorted car parts. It had some hair. This incident haunted me for a long time. Paramedic here. It's 11:30 at night and we get a call for a pregnant lady experiencing cramps and vaginal bleeding. Great. We get on the scene and find this lady standing in her driveway shaking, pale and altered. She wouldn't answer my questions and no one else was around. I figured she lost a lot of blood, and I used a Doppler to listen for fetal heart tones. I told my partner that I was going to check inside to see if anybody else was there, so I grabbed the flashlight and headed towards the open garage. I noticed a lot of blood trailing inside, so I followed it, turning on house lights as I go. It led me through the garage, the kitchen, the living room, and into the bathroom where the only light in the house was already on. I called out, "Paramedics, anyone here?" No answer. I opened the bathroom door and note the blood trailing towards the toilet. Right next to the toilet was an aborted fetus. It was gross. It smelled horrible and I suddenly felt really freaked out. I remembered that mothers still tend to require bonding time with their kid after a miscarriage, so I picked the kid up and put the body in a bag, then returned to the ambulance. Once inside, my partner had started fluids on the patient and I told him what I found. We decided to just hit the road and get her to the hospital and en route. She didn't say anything for a while. Finally, the mom looked at me and simply and quietly asked if she could have her baby. I said of course, and handed her the dead fetus. She teared up and held it tight for the rest of the trip. I just sat there quietly observing her vitals and holding her hand. Surgical tech here. A woman had gotten gastric bypass about 2 months prior to this story. Upon having some problems after the surgery, and not getting proper care from her doctor, she decided to change hospitals to the one I work at. The woman came in complaining of abdominal pain and fatigue. The doctor admitted her to the hospital and ran a bunch of tests. In the meantime, her condition worsened. She became very, very ill. Finally, they saw something abnormal on the X-ray, so they decided to do some exploratory surgery to fix the problem. When I was prepping her for surgery, I met her family. They were so hopeful that this surgery would make her better. Her 5-year-old son cried as the father and older sibling took him from the pre-op room to the waiting room. We got her back to the operating room. The doctor opened her abdomen up and immediately let out a gasp. The smell was horrible. 90% of her bowel was completely dead. Something went very wrong in the first surgery. We think they left a surgical sponge in her abdomen, and it caused a severe infection that spread along her intestines. The doctor decided at that point there was nothing that could be done. All we could do was close her up, make her comfortable, and allow her to die. She didn't even make it 2 days. She was only in her 30s. I couldn't help but feel horrible for her family, all because of a negligent doctor. Please, if you're taking an elective surgery, make sure you get a good doctor. It's so important, it could mean your life. Husband was driving, passenger wife's feet were in a squatting position on the dash when they were rear-ended and shoved into a boat trailer. Her left femur turned to powder when made contact with her left shoulder, shattered her both tib and fib, and also her scapula and her leg actually ended up looping over her shoulder, and her foot and ankle was resting between her back and the seat rest. At first I thought it was a scarf. I was wrong. Her right knee managed to get shoved back directly into her jaw, knocked out all of her teeth, shattered her jaw, and split in 2 directions. She looked like the Predator. Her major mouth and neck muscles were halfway swallowed, then attempted to be thrown back up. My partner's in the back seat holding her head still while I'm throwing a collar on her, planning a tracheostomy to help her breathe. I'll never forget how her eyes and head were shaking, like everything in her was trying to reboot and figure out what the fuck just happened. We tried to punch a breathing hole, but her hyoid bone was fragmented everywhere. We all kinda sat there for a second, trying to make her comfortable as she had last thrashes and passed, putting her body on the stretcher, but with her she didn't even look human. We tried CPR, we tried AEDs. Every time we touched her was responded with bubble wrap sounds of shattered rib cages, neck filled with blood bone and sinew, and her legs are still wrapped all over herself. We never got her breathing again, and she was pronounced dead on arrival. That was the call that made me quit. She looked like my mom, or what I guess she'd look like if in one piece. Road crash rescue operator here. My pager went off while I was working at a mine. I took one look and read, "Major incident. Child trapped 130 kilometers west on the highway." The guy I was working with could probably read my face, because he didn't say a word when I sprinted off. When traveling such large distances to incidents, your heart is in your throat. You always receive such little information about what you're about to witness, and when you see the word child in the initial call-out, this only compounds your emotions. I remember sitting behind the wheel willing the truck to go faster. It's likely that the child had been trapped for hours by the time we arrive, because A, it's such a remote area, and B, the police are notoriously slow at activating us anyway, resulting in entrapments of 5 or 6 hours in some situations. When we arrived at the scene, it was complete chaos. The mother was catatonic and had to be sedated and taken away in an ambulance. The child's other siblings were terrified, and paramedics were in tears. We approached the vehicle and found the child pinned beneath the rear left wheel. His skull had been split open by impact, and brain matter was thrown up to 45 meters from the scene. It was interesting that as soon as I witnessed that, I relaxed. I knew that he was long gone before we arrived, and had not been suffering. It took close to 18 hours before the road crash investigation team arrived. The poor kid was not smelling very nice by that point. Human insides have a very distinctive smell. Anyone that knows that smell will understand. Compounded by Australian heat, and mixing with the smell of groceries that had split open up the highway. It was determined that the child was in a booster seat in the back, and was playing up and taking his arms out of the straps. The mother who was behind the wheel turned around and lost control of the vehicle, which tumbling the highway flung the child out, and by virtue of providence, the car landed back on top of him. The father lived on a remote property approximately 150 kilometers from the accident scene. He left his house with a full tank of fuel in his XR6, and it was empty on his arrival at the scene. One can only imagine what sort of speed he was traveling at. It didn't hit me until the following morning, when we were sweeping the remains on the road to clear the highway after we were all given the clear. I recall there being a large volume of toddlers' clothes strewn up the road. I picked them all up and threw them off to the side, thinking to myself, well, the family won't be needing these. I have attended many grisly road crash incidents, but that's the one that sticks the most. It was my first fatality, and I learned a lot about the resilience of human skin, at the same time learning about the fragility of humans as a whole. The smell still sticks with me to this day. I wasn't quite an EMT yet when this happened. I tested the next morning and passed, so I was close to being certified when this happened. It was me, a paramedic, and the driver. It's around 2:30 a.m. on a Friday night. Dispatch sent us to an apartment building on the top floor for a woman with shortness of breath. We get there, go up the stairs, only to find a 12-year-old at the door who led us to her grandmother who was lying supine on the living room floor. Not what we had planned for. So the poor driver ran down the stairs to get the AED, while me and the paramedic stayed upstairs. We're working her when the 12-year-old comes in from the other room and says, "My sister is having a baby in the bedroom." Just as calm as she could be. Well, with me not being certified to do anything except get vitals, the paramedic stopped CPR on the grandmother and we ran into the next room. Sure enough, the young woman was in labor. Not just in labor though, she was crowning. One push later, we had a baby there. Well, bye-bye grandma. She couldn't be brought back. There wasn't enough hands or time. But the baby wasn't crying, so we had an issue there, and just left grandma. Note, grandmother to the new baby, and mother to the 12-year-old and new mom. Also note that the driver EMT is still getting the AED bag. Well, after some CPR, the baby finally cried, and we just got lucky the amniotic fluid wasn't too bad in his mouth, because we had nothing to use as suction. The new mother was mentally disabled, but held up for us. I held on to the baby as we simply ran to the hospital and yelled to the EMT driver to stay with the deceased grandmother and 12-year-old. After arriving at the hospital, we got the mother situated and were about to walk back over to the rig. The doctor then came out and told us that they had lost the baby. Turns out the baby had been born without his kidneys and couldn't have made it. We went back to the hospital to see how the woman was doing after hearing that. All she could say was, "I lost my mama and my baby in the same day." Over and over again. That was extremely hard to hear and watch her say.